In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Christ is risen. We keep today the memory of the Myrrhbearing women who discovered Christ's resurrection at the tomb, and of Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, who buried Christ. And it's fairly common in the church calendar after a great feast to commemorate, usually on the day after, but in this case a little later, the people involved in the events of that feast. So today we remember those who were most closely involved in the burial and the resurrection of Christ. And what's striking about the actions of these followers of Christ is that as far as they knew, they had nothing to gain from them. They had, like the apostles, forgotten Christ's foretelling of his resurrection. And so, as far as they knew, Christ had died on the cross, and that was that. But they loved him, and regardless of what they could or couldn't get from the action, they knew that the thing to do for the one they loved was to give him a proper burial. And there's a great deal to be learned from this, because so often we face the temptation in the spiritual life to make our relationship with Christ be about what we can get out of it. And as we begin the spiritual life, the hope of reward or even the fear of punishment can be beneficial things in helping us to begin to follow Christ. But these things are not the goal. They're not the state of those who have entered fully into following Christ. Those who fully love Christ love him for his own sake and follow him for the sake of that love. And even Christ's apostles had a difficult time with this. They were constantly arguing over which of them would be the greatest. And even the apostle James, whom we commemorate today, with his brother John, came to Jesus and asked for the places of honor in his kingdom. And of course, both of them got straightened out later on. The apostle James, as we heard today, was the first of the 12 to be martyred in King Herod's early persecution of the church. And the apostle John, of course, was the one who wrote most clearly about this perfect love for Christ. And in his last days, when he was rather old and too weak to give long sermons, would repeat constantly, "Little children, love one another." Because this perfect love of Christ leads us also to love for one another. Because when we love Christ, we recognize his image in all of our fellow human beings. And we love that image as the image of the one whom we love. And this enables us to truly love one another in a new way. Because without this knowledge from the love of Christ, we have no way of distinguishing the beauty of the image of Christ in our fellow human beings from all of those many things which in all of us obscure and distort that image. And so we either fail to love people because of those things that distort the image, or we think that we are loving one another and in truth are loving the things which keep our fellow human beings from being who they are meant to be. So this love of God is what teaches us perfect love and is what we are all called to strive for in this Christian life, so that our Christian life is motivated not by what we hope to gain from it, but purely out of that love. And it's perhaps helpful to end with a story, a well-known story, but often an incompletely quoted story, of St. Herman of Alaska, whose relic we have in our church. And St. Herman was sent to Alaska when it was a Russian colony, and we remember him for his ministry to the native peoples of Alaska and the Aleutian Islands, but a large part of his ministry also was to the Russian colonists there. And so once he found himself talking with some Russian fur traders and the conversation turned to the love of God. And so he asked them, "Do you love God?" They said, "Of course we love God. How can anyone not love God?" And St. Herman said, "Really? I've been trying for 40 years now to love God. And even now, I'm not sure I love him." Because when we love someone, we always think of that person. And we always think of how we can act in such a way as to please that person. And so he asked them if they loved God in this way, and they had to admit that they didn't. And so he said, and this is the famously quoted part, "From this day, from this hour, from this very moment, let us strive to love God with all of our heart and to do his holy will." And so, like the Myrrhbearing women, let us strive to grow ever more perfect in that love for God, which will teach us also the love for all people, that our God may be glorified in all the world. Christ is risen.